Update 2. My parents bought my sister a house and expected me to pay the mortgage. I refused and they sued me, claiming I promised to help. In court, one simple question exposed everything they tried to hide. I couldn't answer honestly without admitting the truth. No, probably not. This would be a permanent arrangement. The advisor closed his laptop and looked at me seriously. You were essentially being asked to fund someone else's retirement while destroying your own. That's not help. That's financial suicide. His words crystallized something I'd been struggling to articulate. This wasn't about being generous versus being stingy. It was about being asked to light my future on fire for someone who'd never even asked if I had matches. I drafted an email to my parents laying out everything the financial advisor had explained. I attached spreadsheets showing the long-term impact, comparison charts, projected retirement scenarios. I thought maybe seeing the actual numbers would help them understand. Dad's response came within an hour. Since when did family require spreadsheets? Mom didn't respond at all. The closing happened on a Thursday. Charlotte posted photos of the keys, the front door, Sophie and Dylan playing in the yard. The comments flooded in with congratulations and excitement. Nobody mentioned how they'd be paying for it. I muted her on social media, but couldn't bring myself to unfriend her. Some small part of me kept hoping this would blow over, that they'd find a solution, that our family would survive this intact. That hope died when the first mortgage payment came due. Charlotte called an hour later, crying. Sophie and Dylan were so excited about having their own rooms. How could I ruin this for them? Eric had already told his landlord they were moving out. They had nowhere else to go. I suggested they find a rental within their budget or look for a smaller house. Charlotte sobbed harder, saying I'd always been jealous of her, always looked down on her life choices. She hung up before I could respond. The family text started that evening. Aunt Paula sent a long message about family loyalty and Christian values. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years weighed in with their opinions. My phone buzzed constantly with notifications, each one another person telling me I was wrong, heartless, ungrateful. I turned off my phone and poured a glass of wine. Jennifer from work had warned me years ago about setting boundaries with family. She'd gone through something similar with her brother and the fallout had lasted years. I'd always thought my family was different, that we communicated better than that. Apparently not. The lawsuit papers arrived 6 weeks later. Marcus and Helen Whitmore versus their daughter. Case number CV 20,248,847. They were suing me for $650,000, claiming verbal contract and promissory estoppel. The legal document stated I promised to help Charlotte, that they'd relied on this promise to their detriment, and that I was now refusing to honor my commitment. I sat in my apartment reading the complaint 3 times, trying to make sense of how we'd gotten here. My parents were actually taking me to court. They'd hired Richard Chen, a lawyer who specialized in family disputes, and they were seeking enough money to cover the mortgage, property taxes, and insurance for 10 years. My hand shook as I called my own attorney, a woman named Margaret Price, who'd handled my estate planning. She reviewed the documents and asked if I'd ever put anything in writing. I hadn't. Had I ever explicitly promised to pay? Absolutely not. Had I been present when they made the purchase? No. Margaret seemed confident we could win, but she warned me the process would be ugly. Family lawsuits always were. Discovery was brutal. They subpoenaed my bank records, investment accounts, and tax returns. Richard Chen argued that my substantial assets proved I could easily afford to help and my refusal was purely vindictive. He painted me as a wealthy miser hoarding money while my sister's children faced potential homelessness. The local newspaper got wind of the case. Sister refuses to help family, gets sued made the headline. The article included quotes from Charlotte about her struggles as a working mother and her shock at my betrayal. They included my job title and salary range, making me look even worse. Old friends stopped calling. Neighbors avoided eye contact in the hallway. Someone left a note on my car, calling me a selfish witch in less polite terms. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects to avoid thinking about the trial. My boss noticed the strain and suggested I take some personal time. I refused. Staying busy was the only thing keeping me sane. Depositions began in March. I sat across from Richard Chen while he asked about every financial decision I'd made in the past decade. Why had I chosen to save so aggressively? Did I not care about my niece and nephew's well-being? Had I always felt superior to Charlotte? Margaret objected frequently, but the question still stung. Chen was good at his job, twisting my responsible choices into evidence of selfishness. Charlotte's deposition was worse. She cried through most of it, describing how she'd struggled after Dylan was born, how Eric's income wasn't reliable, how mom and dad had always helped her because I never needed anything. She claimed I told her once that I'd always be there for her, which apparently constituted a binding promise in her mind. I'd said that when we were teenagers after her first boyfriend broke up with her. Using it as legal evidence felt absurd and heartbreaking in equal measure. The trial date got set for September. Margaret prepared me for testimony, coaching me on staying calm and sticking to facts. The case would likely come down to credibility and contract law. Since nothing was in writing, we just needed to prove I'd never made a specific promise to pay their mortgage. Summer crawled by. I lost 12 pounds from stress and developed a persistent headache that wouldn't respond to medication. My doctor suggested therapy. I went twice before deciding I didn't have time for it. Mom called a week before trial asking if I wanted to settle. They'd accept $500,000 instead of the full amount. I told her no, then asked if she realized what she was doing to our relationship. She said I'd made this choice when I refused to help Charlotte. The line went dead. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Judge Patricia Morrison presided, a woman in her early 60s with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She had a reputation for no-nonsense rulings and zero tolerance for emotional manipulation. Richard Chen presented his case first, calling Charlotte to the stand. She wore a modest dress and minimal makeup, looking young and vulnerable. Chen walked her through her financial struggles, Eric's inconsistent work, the kids' needs. Charlotte explained how mom and dad had found the perfect house, how they'd all been so excited, how it initially seemed supportive. Did you believe your sister would help with the mortgage? Chen asked. Absolutely, Charlotte said, dabbing her eyes. She'd always been the successful one. We thought she'd want to help family. Margaret cross-examined carefully, establishing that I'd never seen the house, never discussed specific payment amounts, never signed anything. Charlotte admitted the actual conversation had been brief, and that I'd said no within minutes of hearing about the plan. So, your sister explicitly refused to pay the mortgage? Margaret asked. Yes, but we thought she'd come around. Family helps each other. Mom and Dad testified next, describing their retirement savings depleted by the down payment. Dad's voice cracked as he talked about potentially losing their own home to cover Charlotte's mortgage. Mom glared at me from the witness stand, her expression mixing hurt and fury. Margaret had warned me this part would be difficult. Watching my parents paint themselves as victims was surreal. They described their sleepless nights, their worry about Charlotte and the kids, their disbelief that their own daughter would let them suffer like this.